This panel is anything but artificial. Here's a real conversation on how we can apply AI in our everyday work as editors, with moderator Carolyn Giardina, joined by experts Peter Busch from Flawless AI, Asher Pink from MPEG's Emerging Technology Committee, and Morgan Prygrocki from Adobe. Take it away, Carolyn.
Welcome to the last session of the day. I think it's been a terrific day. Let's give a round of applause to all of the previous panelists. And of course, the incomparable Jenny McCormick and everyone at ACE. So it may feel like about a minute ago when we were sitting here talking about how AI was approaching for editing and for uses across Hollywood, but I think we can agree that it is no longer approaching. It has arrived. And there are a lot of thorny subjects to talk about. It's creating enthusiasm and it's also creating fear. And its impact can be felt everywhere, including in production, post-production, asset management, marketing, accounting, and archiving, and certainly in the subject of jobs. These tools are developing fast and for a wide range of uses, but for the purposes of this session, we will be talking with representatives from two that are closely linked to editorial. And hopefully, at the end of this session, we'll leave you feeling a little bit more informed. Seated next to me is Peter Busch, who brings more than 25 years of experience in entertainment, including roles at Paramount and Walt Disney Feature Animation. Warner Brothers, excuse me. He joined Flawless in 2023 as Senior Vice President of Customer Success, bringing their TrueSync and Deep Editor products to market and leading partnerships with ACE, MPEG, Avid, and Adobe. TrueSync is a dubbing tool that effectively syncs an actor's mouth movement to new dialogue, and Deep Editor offers a similar tool in post-production, and he's going to share more about these tools during this session. Morgan Prygrocki is Senior Manager of Strategic Development for Adobe's Pro Video Product and Engineering team, where she's involved in post-production workflows and leads initiatives in AI technology. With more than 16 years of experience, she has supported productions ranging from sports broadcasts to films, and she's going to share more about Adobe's latest tools. And also on the panel is Asher Pink, an editor and visual effects editor with a formal education in film production and business, complemented by self-taught programming knowledge, and he co-chairs the MPEG Emerging Technology Committee. So to start, we're going to learn a little bit about some of the tools, starting with the tools from Flawless. So Peter, I'm going to hand this to you, and maybe you could take up to 5 minutes, but give us a little bit of an overview of those tools, and you can introduce the video. Yes.
I think it'll be good if we actually start with the video in the back. It just gives really good context for what we do. I can talk a little bit more about the lineage and the history, but just to set the stage.
Flawless-enabled editing has arrived. For the first time, Avid's powerful Panel SDK connects you directly to Flawless's Deep Editor, a groundbreaking AI editing tool that meets the quality and ethical standards of the film industry.
We're on to something big here.
Perfect your story without returning to set.
Just watch.
Eliminate costly reshoots.
This is brilliant.
Refine dialogue and increase efficiency.
An idea by definition has never been done before.
Achieve your vision faster without compromise. Deep Editor enables you to transfer performances from one shot to another. Control the rhythm of your storytelling with performance muting.
You see what you want to see, just like your father.
Insert natural pauses and retime delivery.
You see what you want to see.
Deep Editor enables you to apply ADR to any shot.
Seems to have your signature. Do I need to be worried about this?
Without the need to cut away.
Do I need to be worried about this?
Integrated into Deep Editor is Art, the artistic rights treasury. Built on the principles of consent and the protection of artistic rights, Art gives performers the ability to review and consent to edits. Trusted by major Hollywood studios and recognized by industry guilds like SAG-AFTRA, Deep Editor ensures that artists remain in control throughout, Every edit is transparent, every modification can be approved, and every performance adjustments uphold industry standards. Deliver up to 4K resolution in ACES color space with 16-bit precision and seamless integration into industry workflows. Simply drag and drop straight from your Media Composer bin into Deep Editor. Let the magic happen and return it to your sequence for a flawless playback. It's that simple.
To believe is one thing,
Smarter, faster, and more powerful than ever.
but to know is something completely different.
This isn't just AI. It's flawless enabled editing.
So I think that the video does a fantastic job, obviously showing some of the real practical use cases that you guys have likely encountered in any of your edits. But it also touches fundamentally on what this discussion about AI has really centered around, which is how do we embrace the actual talent, the labor, whether it's the editorial side or the acting side that's going to be using these tools and deploying these tools into production. And so my job becomes very easy because so much thought from Flawless has gone in over the last decade. And we're founded by DGA, WGA member, a guy named Scott Mann, a Hollywood film director. The origin story of Flawless is in his own film back in 2015. He saw a German dub version of this film called Heist with Robert De Niro. And not that the dub was poor, but the adaptation of his English script was pretty much destroyed in that process. And he thought, surely there's a better way to visually translate content. And so he set out to solve this problem, and he found a paper at SIGGRAPH in 2018 called Deep Video Portraits. And what that paper was is early human rendering, generative rendering, and using that to basically then articulate the mouth to sync up with the audio. So from a localization standpoint, it becomes more of a native language viewing experience. Well, that's good for the audience. And so extensive work went into working with the guilds, both on the acting side and then working with MPEG and the Emerging Tech Committee. We spent 10 months building out a kind of a recommended film and TV workflow. So as these tools are adopted, we're fitting into workflows. And so my background's in production management, starting in 2D and 3D animation, and I realized the bedrock of all production is its own workflow. And so we've generally been making content the same way for the better part of a century. And so we didn't want to change that fundamentally. And so I encourage you all, we got a table in the back here to try out our tools, and it's exciting to be here.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more about how you're working with Avid, for example, and basically where does the tool fit into the workflow?
Yeah, so we, going back to workflows, is we started an integration with Avid when they launched their Panel SDK, which allows us to have a native plugin basically directly into the workflow. And so what you're creating with Deep Editor is what we call a VUB, is a visual dub. And so you have a original performance, what we call source media, and then you have a new performance, and that can come from either another video take or that could come from audio. And so in Avid, you're essentially lining those two things up, and we suggest a really low-tech way of seeing if it's going to work is just kind of putting your hand over the mouth and see if the new performance is going to work with the physical performance, right? And then when you create a VUB, that's going to happen directly in Media Composer. You then are solving fundamentally a story problem a different way. And so a lot of what my team is doing is just educating people on where VUBs are inserted into the edit, how that's going to work. And we get asked all the time, when will we be in Resolve, when will we be in Premiere? We have a standalone web application, so you can create VUBs outside of that. And that starts with the offline edit and creative editorial. So we teach people essentially how to create VUBs and where do your VUB ideas go. And then we have a whole refinement bit where we can refine lip sync on a per frame basis, and then ultimately doing your finishing in your online conforms.
And you keep mentioning we're showing people. So if people want to get trained, where can they find that?
Yep. So we're launching a whole training program with KeyCode that you guys know are here. So in mid-September, we'll be offering these training courses. Big thing to call out there is that you complete the course, you're going to be certified as a visual dubbing artist. Why that's so important is we're getting asked on a weekly basis by the studios and streamers, who knows your stuff? And so we want to have a very methodical way on how we're training people how to use this. It's only a 4-hour course, right? So we have an offline course, we have an online course, and a refinement course, but we'll also have an online directory. So it's kind of a matchmaking service. So if you learn these skills, they're marketable. The studios want to know who knows these things because it's so new and groundbreaking. If they're starting new productions, there's going to be some flexibility on essentially where they find people. And so I'd encourage you to sign up over in the booth over here. There's also a KeyCode is here, so you can learn about their courses, but those will start up. Those will be online and in person from mid-September, and those will just run in perpetuity, basically forever.
And then as far as uses so far, are you finding that studios are primarily looking at this for, to create the local language versions for different markets, or is it being used more frequently in post-production, a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. Localization, I think, is a clear value proposition, right? As people understand that if they don't prefer dubbing or subtitling, it makes sense why visual dubbing is a different experience. I think this is the right room for you all to understand that the post-production side of what we're doing. You guys, like, when we get asked all the time, who's your competition? Well, our competition has been compromise. It's over the shoulder cuts, right? It's these things that you're having to do in the edit over and over again, and problems you've had for decades. What Deep Editor allows you to do is fundamentally solve problems that you've not thought about using AI to solve for. And so when people are starting to try it out, that's where it's starting to increase in interest and increase in usability. And so we have a campaign called Give Us a Shot. Everybody that's used Deep Editor once on their second and third productions, they're using it 40, 50, or sometimes 100 shots in their production. So it's very exciting for me to see the impact that we're having on the industry, and not surprised. It's everything I saw 3 years ago when I interviewed.
Thank you. Morgan, would you tell us about what Adobe is up to?
Yes, everything. I'll say that the way that we're approaching AI development right now is really focused around creators. At the end of the day, we are a company that is based on subscribers, so it's really not in our best interest to completely eliminate the creative as part of this process. But whether it's pre-production use cases around concepting and ideation with tools like Firefly, or even some of the more assistive AI features that are actually, despite being labeled as AI, they are what we label internally as sensei features, which are effectively machine learning and AI, our own personal algorithm. I think the way we're trying to approach this is we're trying to complement the existing editorial process rather than fully replacing anything. There's not a single feature that has been implemented in any of our tools that hasn't been a direct request from a large constituency of our user base. And I think when we think about how we would like to move forward in terms of AI model development, it's always going to be creator centric. Our models have never trained on user content, never will train on user content. A lot of the features that we've implemented in our tools are designed to be used on sensitive content. That's why we constantly optimize a lot of these features to run on device. So even if you are working in an air-gapped environment, we try to accommodate for that. There are some instances where, depending on the actual feature you're using, that might be impossible due to the training data set required, but we are attempting wherever possible. And finally, all of our training data set has been sourced from either Adobe stock content or any public domain content, any content that we have licensed to train on. I think because of that approach, it's allowed us to enable our users where if they generate something and they want to use it commercially, they can use it right away. But I think that the future of a lot of this feature development is really going to be multimodal, and the next frontier of where we're really centralizing a lot of our focus is around exposing some of the best in class models that folks are seeing success with and embedding them into the creative surfaces that people are already using. Because what we found out early on is it kind of takes you out of your creative flow if you have to go to a web page, generate something, download it, bring it into another tool to make further refinements to it. So anything that we can do to help keep creatives within their flow and the tools that they're already using has been resonating really well with our creative user base. So lots of things.
Okay, and just to be more specific, what tools could you elaborate a little bit on what tools are actually in Premiere at the moment? What are the applications? What are the tasks that you're addressing?
Yeah. So Premiere has actually had Sensei features in it for several years now at this point. And over time, we've started to foundationally build upon some of those features. So things like automatic transcription of your content that can power automated caption placement on the timeline to move in line with spoken dialogue. That kind of then fed into what we refer to as text-based editing, which allows you to transcribe all of your clips on import and then make editorial decisions based off of the transcript of what someone said with edits rippling into your timeline. The next phase for that we got a lot of user feedback around was, that's great that I can search across my transcript, I can find Frankenbites, that's great, but I also want the ability of being able to visually search across the media in my project. So over the last 18 months, we've been working really tirelessly to bring to market what we're referring to as media intelligence. If you are on 25.2 or later, you already have access to this, but it's a little bit hidden in the Premiere Pro menu. But what that allows you to do is use natural language to search for those visual moments that might exist in your footage, much in the same way that you'd describe those moments to an assistant editor. So if you wanted to search for things like, I'd like to find the wide shot of a red car driving down the road with trees on either side of it, those are now search queries that you can enter into the search menu and pull up the in and out points of where our media intelligence has visually detected those words in the pixels of your content. There's no manual tagging that's associated with that. This is all powered by vector embeddings, which is a fancy way of saying a mathematical representation of objects' relationship to each other. It is not proprietary to Adobe, but the way we are implementing it is. But beyond that, I mean, we've started to roll out a number of generative tools as well. The first of which has just hit Premiere Pro this year, which is Generative Extend. Really what that's aimed at is helping users to not have to do manual surgery on certain clips to cover things like a transition or duplicate frames in order to just create a pause in a clip for dramatic effect. It's basically being powered by the Adobe Firefly video model to give you a couple of extra frames so that if you do need to make some of those pauses or create a little bit of extra clip real estate to cover a transition, it gives you the ability of doing that. But I'd encourage you to check out some of the new features that we're starting to roll out in the Firefly website. Things like generative sound effects has been something that a lot of our users have been having a lot of fun with. Being able to use your voice as sort of a Foley reference for some of the sound effects you might want to create. Things like boards, which is a multiplayer canvas that allows you to not only amend some of your own media if you want to use some of the Photoshop features like Gen Fill or Generative Expand, but it also allows you to generate video in a previs capacity using Firefly models in addition to a lot of other third-party models as well. So I think we're really trying to expose the right features to the right users, whether you're in concepting and ideation or whether you're in post-production. I think we're consider myself the suggestion box, by the way, as well. So if you've got ideas of things that you would like to see, this is something that we are actively engaging with users on a daily basis because, as I mentioned before, everything is basically being prioritized based off of user request.
And also in your remarks, thank you for mentioning ethics. That's obviously a very tricky subject that's being addressed right now. What I'd actually like to ask you, actually, anybody can jump in on this one. Everybody's talking about ethical AI. There's no easy answer. Do you believe it's an achievable goal?
I believe it's achievable goal because it's fundamentally the right way to bring product to market, right? Like I don't know why you wouldn't do it ethically, right? Like it's easy. You also can take a look at it from our perspective. We're not going to be able to recruit people to come work for us if we're doing unethical things, and ultimately we aim to impact the industry that we've worked in for my entire 25-year career, not put it out of work, right? And so there's nuance to it. And then there's a lot of gray, murky areas. And so the way you address that with is very, very open transparency. And clearly you can see when things are crossing lines, right? We're all adults here. And so I think it's when you approach it with sort of a clear head and the ability to engage the various guilds that have been thinking about this as hard as we have, through collaboration, through transparency, and also through a little bit of patience. We're working hard to figure this out, right? And I think obviously the entire planet is trying to sort of assess the impact. But the good thing is I've seen a real strong willingness of this industry to do ethical things. There's certainly a lot of bad actors. We should certainly be very fearful. But if you support the players, the companies, the people that are trying to get it right and be very open and honest, like I'm you'll see I'm an optimist at heart. I think this is, I mean, we prided ourselves on doing the most innovative things in the world. We will continue to do that as an industry. So I think we can.
I think the only mechanism for ensuring that we have ethical AI is transparency. So I would encourage you to do your research. If you're using a model, try to find out what its training data set is. Right now, there is nearly every single use case around generative tool use is being managed on a case-by-case basis, but I think it's important to do your research and ask what the training data set was. And there are standards being put in place that will allow you to be able to extract a sort of digital nutrition label of what has gone into the creation of an asset. And I know what everyone's thinking, like the last thing we need is another standard, but unfortunately the answer is yet another standard to make sure that that transparency continues to live with assets even after they're exported out of whatever application you're in.
Thanks. Okay. Asher, before we get into the Emerging Technology Committee, how are you personally using AI in your day-to-day work?
Sure, absolutely. So I use AI and machine learning quite a bit. I work as a visual effects editor right now, and well, actually, I can go back to Bob Marley. I worked on that with Pam Martin, and what I used was After Effects' generative fill. There was a shot at the very end of the movie where there's a man walking on a horse, or riding on a horse, excuse me, for about 30 seconds. The problem is that there is a horse wrangler guiding the horse. Now, we needed, in this circumstance, we needed to remove this horse wrangler for preview. Without generative fill, Adobe After Effects' generative fill, there's no way I would have been able to remove the horse, and this would have been like the pivotal, crucial, heartfelt moment of the film. With generative fill, I was able to do that. The other thing, on the more technical side of what I do, it's a lot of database management and data wrangling, and I've made a bespoke FileMaker database. But I know how to code, of course, and know HTML and CSS, JavaScript, and I know conceptually what I want to do. I don't necessarily know how to get all the pieces working together. So often I'll write a blueprint in ChatGPT of the rules and procedures I want to do with my system. I'll have ChatGPT write it out. It'll come back with some errors. I'll fix them. I'll run it through my system, usually 2 or 3 tries where I've said, no, I need this sort of lookup table to match, and eventually I get it right. So it's more or less expanding on the technical skill sets that I've already developed without generative AI, but being able to get the result faster and more efficient.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, as co-chair of the Emerging Technology Committee, could you tell us a little bit about what your committee's working on in AI?
Sure thing. So we're sort of a strike force for the Editors Guild. What we do is we look at all these technologies and technology companies that say, that they're a magic box that can solve all these problems and take everyone out of work, and we give them a closer look. We really delve into the technicals. We stress test these technologies, and we figure out what they can do and what they can't do. And we also figure out where our members fit into these technologies. A lot of the time, and this is sort of getting into labor politics, the Editors Guild has covered tasks and covered roles. And these roles have been existing in the contract for like 60 years, but they're pretty robust tasks. So what we're able to do is we're able to take these technologies and these tasks that AI or machine learning have sort of integrated with, and figure out the historical through line of which Editors Guild role, which Editors Guild classification would be best suited to complete this new AI or machine learning task. From there, what we will do is we will make recommendations to the board of directors and figure out just policy-wise how best to proceed. Sometimes it's working with companies to help them realign their workflows, like we did with Flawless. And in other cases, it's setting up guardrails and suggesting guardrails and things to look out for as we approach negotiations, and And yeah, we're just sort of on top of all of it. We're reading research papers, pending patents. I have Adobe's research papers. I get a notification every time one of them drops down. So yeah, we just try to stay as up to date as possible, covering all of our different classifications.
For the last contract,
Yeah.
one of the pieces in there was there were going to be periodic meetings, I believe, joint industry meetings or with some of the producers. Could you give us an update? Have those taken place, and can you provide any information about what's resulting from those?
Sure. Unfortunately, I don't have that knowledge. That's stuff that's usually discussed within executive session. And as a member not on the board, I just don't have that information. However, um, the executive director Scott George and I and the committee speak quite a bit. There was for example, there was an instance where there was a question of whether a new task with synthetic dialogue could be done by a post PA or someone that is not classified within the Editors Guild. And I made the historical parallels that when and just to be clear, synthetic dialogue is just a nice technical way of saying like deep fake audio, less pejorative, I guess. But I made the through line for the guild that in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, yeah. What you would do is you'd punch in on your soundboard. You'd have a little microphone. You'd punch in. You would record your temp ADR, right? And then we sort of ran into the digital revolution. We started taking out our iPhones, and the assistant editors would be recording the temp ADR and importing that into Avid. Synthetic dialogue is just the next step of that. So through that logical through line and that historical through line, we can make the case that generating synthetic dialogue, if it is permissible in the first place, would be a covered task covered by the assistant editor in picture editorial. Stuff like that.
Another thing that the guild's been talking about is training opportunities. Could you give us an update in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Peter might be able to contribute as well. So we find, is this still? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we find opportunities to train our members. So we, even though ChatGPT can, you can give it a coding instruction and it can generate code, knowing the fundamentals on how computers work and how they process instructions is just sort of a good tool to know. So we instituted a Python programming class. Excuse me. It could have been JavaScript. It could have been anything else, but Python is just a super useful tool to know. And we were able to teach a number of members how to start building their own automated workflows to, for instance, well, I can give you one example of what I do. Sync Sketch, which is a way of visual effects producers to sort of mark up cuts and say, this shot is going to be a visual effect, this shot is going to be a visual effects. It creates markers that are not, that do not play well with Avid. So I was able to write a script in Python that, and actually was able to write 90% of it myself, that was able to convert those markers directly into Avid, which generates all the information I need to start getting the bidding process going. So classes like that will be able to help assistant editors move ahead as we start getting into more automated and AI-assisted processes. The other thing we're doing right now is very shortly we're introducing an Unreal Engine course, which yes. One of the things we learned is that studios are trending more towards virtual production, which is a simple way of saying they're going to pre-visualize as much as possible so that they can reduce the amount of shoot days, figure out exactly what they need, shoot just that, bring it into editorial, but people are going to have to edit that. So we're creating a course where people can sort of mock up and pre-visualize their own scenes and get all of that in place. It's also helpful for if you have an idea for reshooting or additional photography, you can create that sort of fake pickup shot to slot into your cut. So we're doing everything we can to keep our members up to date and to give them skills that are transferable into this new age.
Thanks. And you can start with this next question, but anybody feel free to jump in. Obviously, there's a lot of questions about jobs. What are the jobs that you see either changing in classification, or they'll be more needed, or shrinking, or what are the individual roles, and how are you looking at them?
Sure. I mean, we cover a lot of classifications. So loggers and transcribers are in trouble. These tasks that are the closer a task is to the spoken or written word, I think, are more exposed. So we could start the very most exposed is with loggers, transcribers. Then we get into sound and synthetic dialogue. The safest, I would say, are the scripted picture editors and their assistants. And also below that, the unscripted picture editors. But because the unscripted picture editors are closer to the transcript and the written word, they are slightly more exposed.
Yeah, the thing I'll add to, I've been for the last 2 years in probably 1,000 different rooms asking the same question, right? Like, how is this going to impact our jobs? Are you putting me out of work? And I go back to fundamentally, like, we've built a company to solve very fundamental problems, right? And so I think everybody's been part of an edit where they see a performance they like from one camera angle, but they're asked, or the pacing or the timing of the edit, they need the other camera angle to work. Well, what we've been able to build is to take the best performance from any camera angle and transfer that across, right? And so we get a huge response from the acting community and the producing and the directing community. Well, now the honest concern that we've heard from MPEG and a lot of labor is we're going to actually create a lot of work. This might create too much work. Our director's going to want to overuse this. And so to the guardrails, we have to be very deliberate on how we train people so that it's a very efficient process and that we're training the right people at the right time in production. Because if we can solve a lot of problems and we make them easy to solve, this industry, usually when things become a lot easier to do, we do a lot more of it, right? And so it's going to be fundamental to sort of understand how these tools are implemented, things like what we're doing, but ultimately start to collaborate and share the knowledge that's going to be out there so that we're all helping each other as a community. It's very obvious throughout all of today what a wonderful community editing is. It's something I hold deep to my heart because we all know sort of the beauty of the craft. And this new wave of technologies and how that it's going to be implemented in the individual roles, we're being very deliberate on how we're training that so that these do become marketable skills. You can find work from knowing these tools, and ultimately you're creating better product. You're telling a better story, and that's good for everyone.
I would also interject that there are also some roles that I think are pretty universally accepted that we know are going to change, like rotoscoping, for instance. Raise your hand if you're going to miss rotoscoping. Exactly. One of the other trends that we're seeing, particularly in unscripted, is that the post timeline is just ever shrinking, and when you have to have a small army of line producers that are reviewing some of these shows that have insane shoot to air ratios, it's a lot of bodies that have to constantly be reviewing a lot of this content, and it goes back to the transcription process as well. So I think there is going to be some changes around that, but I'd also encourage you to also look at the glass half full, in the sense that when Photoshop first came out, a lot of people thought that cameras would cease to exist. There's a whole, if you want to look at YouTube, there's like a Today Show little snippet back in the 90s on this. But we still, in fact, have cameras. The world did not burn down. But I do think the process changed a little bit. There is going to be some changing in the roles itself. But when you also look at the process of creating a better product, a few years ago, only about 14% of live action projects even had the budget for previs, because it involved basically investing some of your visual effects budget into previs. Now, pretty much anybody that can communicate an idea has some capacity to at least try to tell a visual story of what it is they intend to shoot. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to see a democratization of the stories that end up getting greenlit, because now if you've got a great idea, you have the tools at your disposal to at least pitch it. And I think we should be competing on story at this point. I mean, technology is always going to continue to evolve, but at the same time, AI isn't good at writing stories. People are.
I think too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk on that.
I think one thing too, I mean, I've been working in AI since 2007, that it actually moves a lot slower than you think. Everybody has this anxiety, it's going to outpace me. And if you think of something about virtual production, right? And it's been on the rise for a better part of a decade. Of the 1,500 productions last year, 60 used virtual production, right? It can be wonderful. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's very disruptive to workflow at the end of the day. But that's why I say patience, right? Fundamentally, production's not changing. There's a reason a labor contract 60 years ago still applies, right? Is that we know generally the process, storytelling wins out, right? So let's all get together in the tasks that are fundamental to the creative process. They will evolve. They always have. If what you were doing at the beginning of your career is what you're doing 15, 20 years later, like, I would be very, very surprised. But that's where it's, keeping up on these skills, upskilling, being aware of what's being used, the community aspect of how they're being used. I love hearing all the stories from the field on these creative uses. It's fundamental to how this stuff gets adopted.
I would love to just give some historical context that I think may explain where we think the trajectory is going. So if you use the analog to digital, film to digital revolution as an example, what we saw was that the picture assistant editors inherited a lot of sound work. The sound departments retracted in workforce, and the picture editors ended up taking a lot of that work. And at the end of the day, I think that is the same sort of trend that's going to be happening with the AI and the machine learning revolution, is that these tasks that were specialized and downstream, that were handled by downstream specialized professionals, will be absorbed by the by scripted or unscripted pictures and assistants. Now, this creates a bad issue for our sound departments, our colorists, but it also is not a great thing necessarily for the assistants, because I believe that many assistants want to picture edit, and to do picture editing, it takes practice and repetition and consistency. And if you're bogged down with these tasks that you have inherited, and that's a kind way of saying it, inherited from your sound department, you will never have the time to learn what to do. So it's imperative that while these transitions are happening, that we make sure that the downstream people are getting the work that is analog and parallel to what they have previously been doing.
Do you, in the work you're doing with the committee, are you finding that the studios plan to keep the same number of assistants if, some of these tasks are changing?
I mean, I don't know. I think that they're going to try to keep it as small as possible. I mean, that's their imperative. But I think they're going to see, at least on the picture side, that as more and more work is inherited. You know what? This is a great example. I worked on a show that had synthetic dialogue. We were doing synthetic ADR to get this movie done. And it was so imperative that we got it right. The director was being very specific on how he wanted the lines to be delivered. And if you've prompted anything, you know that it is, you don't have full control over it. So we had a second assistant who was specialized and spent much of his day coming up with alts and versions and performances. And that could be a full-on position where you have hired a second that is just going to be doing, much of the day is going to be doing lines, redoing ADR lines, temp ADR lines. So yeah, I think that in that sense, they will hire as many people as they need to get the job done, but it could create a disparity between the departments.
Okay. We've obviously talked about a few tools already on this panel, but in your experiences, what additional tools? I mean, there are countless AI tools out there right now being developed and already available. Which ones are you personally finding are maybe the ones that are most notable for this community at this stage?
Sure. Man, I mean, it depends on what you do. As a visual effects editor, I'm using Adobe's products. I'm using Blackmagic's machine learning assisted rotoscoping. If you're doing sound, it's a ML assisted denoisers. It really depends on what your tasks are. But I don't know. Maybe you guys have better context of what you've been seeing from your users.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of success with a variety of different models. There's one tool that has a panel experience in Premiere that I have been having a really fun time with. It's called Quickture. They also have a panel within Avid as well, but it does a cloud transcription of your media and then allows you to see like a beat sheet of everything that's described throughout all of the media. And then you can also do things like prompt-driven rough cuts from the tool itself. So it's not final anything, trust me, it's not final. But I think the cool thing about that is it allows you to play around with different tones in a much faster capacity. So if you want to play a scene in a little bit more of a humorous capacity, you can do that. You can also do really fun Frankenbite string outs, which is especially fun for unscripted. Like if, let's take, for instance, like Jersey Shore. If you want to create like a montage of every time somebody said Jim Tam Laundry, it's these types of tools that allow you to really play around with some funny ways of cutting up your project. But in addition to that, we've been seeing a lot of our users have a lot of success with more like node-based approaches like Comfy UI. Not an Adobe product, but I think what we're seeing trends around is users being able to create highly customized node graphs that take advantage of some of the strengths of some of the models that exist out there. And I think that trend is likely going to continue in the future. But I mean, also just like little quality of life updates, things like enhanced speech, which is an Adobe feature, which allows you to clean up dialogue intelligibility. Let's say, for instance, there's a mic pop or there's a honking car in the background where you just want to be able to go in and quickly clean up the dialogue portion of it. Little quality of life tools like that might seem tiny, but at the end of the day, in the right scenario, might really save your bacon. So just to name a few, but I mean, there's a ton of really amazing models out there. VO3, I've been playing around with a ton this week. But it really kind of depends on the task you're looking for. But those are probably my top favorites this week.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I think we can agree from this panel that the opportunities really will be important when it comes to training and education. In addition to that, what additional advice would you give?
I think the biggest thing is just having the right approach and the right attitude. At the end of the day, every example you just heard, like those are tools to solve real problems, right? And in talking to the community, because the tasks are fundamentally going to change. They always will, as I said earlier. But there's not. I think it's just having a willingness to try, right? You're good at your craft. Like what parts are going to make you more efficient, right? What parts are going to make the product better? And that really boils down to attitude. And I've not been one that's fearful of AI. And AI is just another term for automation at the end of the day. I mean, it's just evolved over years. Anything in motion capture, visual effects has been built on data models. So it's becoming a lot more commonplace now. But I think a lot of that is just attitude, transparency, and then talking to your peers. What are they doing? What are they playing around with? And there's all these little quality of life things that are just going to, make you work a little bit more efficiently. And if they improve your product, again, that's good for everyone.
And since it's evolving very quickly, keep an eye on it because chances are what we're talking about in this field in a year is going to be pretty different than what we're saying today. We wanted to leave time for questions and comments because I know there's a lot to learn in this space. So please raise your hand if you have any questions. Oh, we have a lot.
Thank you so much. This was actually really enlightening. I do have a question for Flawless. With the Deep Editor, alongside with the ability to seamlessly create the VUBs, are you guys also working on the ability to detect when your software has been used to create a VUB, maybe in a disingenuous way?
Two things. So you saw a bit of this in the video. We have a whole consent flow built in, and that consent flow is A couple things. When you set up a project in Deep Editor, you're going to specify a rights clearance manager. That person typically is a post producer that's clearing stock footage, stock music, just trying to get clearances. They now will be an additive task is clearing the artistic rights, the actor's rights, that if there was a fundamental line change, they'll interact with talent and get that consent. Now, what that does is that gives us a consent ledger. So we know when AI is used. To answer your question directly, we are not building something fundamentally to know if it's misused. However, we're doing extensive qualification on who we're training as our users. We gatekeep all of that. We understand we can make anybody say anything in any language. We do not take that power lightly. So we're leaning into the entertainment industry, and that's all that we're selling to. We don't sell to news organizations, right? We don't sell to the individual YouTube creators. There's plenty of tools out there, right? So we're leaning into premium content creation to tell better stories. And that's basically the best way we as a company can do to make sure there is minimal bad actors. But on the back end, you have to realize we understand our users and who's using it. And ultimately, that consent piece for actors is we're not going to put a performance on screen that they weren't aware of. And that's why we've got the response from the acting community.
I actually have one quick note about that. So one thing about detection software, just in general, is that nefarious actors are always going to be one step ahead of whatever the latest detection tool is. So there is an open source spec that sits underneath the Linux Foundation. It's called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which is a mouthful, which is why it's going by the C2PA open standard spec. And what that spec aims at is ensuring provenance throughout the editorial chain. So there are some open standards right now that are in active development. Adobe is one of the contributing members. We do not own the spec. As I said, it's under the Linux Foundation, but there are tools in place right now that are ensuring that we can at least track everything throughout the chain. What you would end up seeing in a situation where, let's say, something looks like it's been tampered with is you would basically see like a timeline under the video that would show like a red line of like where something might have been manipulated without consent. It is going to be an evolving standard though, but I would just caution against some of the detection software because that is kind of a moving target that makes it really challenging to track over time.
As a person that's used Veil 3 and has used generative AI, now as an assistant editor, do we get reclassified as assistant editor engineer? Because if we're engineering, hear me out. If we're engineering these scenes, these frames for the editor or for the producer, are we kind of getting credited in a different classification?
Ask a rep. That's always the go-to. Yeah, that I don't think any of us would have an answer for that. I don't think that I know that making classifications is a painful process. So any tasks, I mean, if I remember, assistant editor, the definition of the assistant editor is one who assists the editor, more or less. So probably not, but I would ask a rep.
I have seen people self-classify themselves as prompt engineers, though. That's a new trend, not an official classification.
Is there anyone working on computer-assisted processes for assistant editors? Because we do a lot of repetitive, mind-numbing tasks that humans tend to make mistakes on. And I just was wondering if anyone is focused on that.
Yes. And I think one of the roles that I take on is having those conversations to find out what those repetitive tasks are. So hit me with your top requests. Consider myself the suggestion box. But yes, the short answer is we are actively having those conversations.
Hi, I work in documentary, and you were talking about transparency, and part of, I think, a conversation I'm not seeing a lot is transparency with audiences and concerns, especially in my work about like muddying the historical record and that kinds of stuff. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how we're moving forward with that.
So the C2PA spec is also something that online players, like the New York Times, for instance, TikTok, and a few Facebook, or I'm sorry, Meta, have all started to implement some version of this spec. So what you're going to start to see over time is a little CR logo. The goal is to hopefully make that as ubiquitous as the copyright symbol. But what you might end up seeing online is, let's say, for instance, your crazy uncle's posting deepfake content on Meta again. There would be a little red line over the portion of the video that would have not had that provenance associated with it, so it would alert viewers. But I think part of the bigger challenge that we have is this room of people understand the concept of provenance. My crazy uncle does not understand the concept of provenance. So I think this is going to be, a global effort where we're going to need to do our part to also make sure that we're educating the masses. Part of what we're doing is engaging with our government leaders, and we're trying to do our part to put out as much documentation, especially with, folks in higher education right now that are coming into this job market, to be able to understand some of these concepts. But I mean, like the other half of this is making sure that the masses actually understand, what those transparency measures even look like. But yes, there are measures in place right now for that. You'll start seeing it more.
Hi. You mentioned using Adobe stock to train the Adobe models, and I'm wondering how you informed the creators that post stock imagery how to opt out, and how you compensate them for using their creations to train these models.
Yeah, great question. There are provisions in the contract that do disclose that, and then we also we pay our stock contributors as well as a result of that. So anybody that is contributing to stock, we want to make sure that they're going in eyes wide open with what that means.
Did you announce the change in terms, or because it seemed like there was a little kerfuffle about a year ago
Terms of
about the
use.
change in terms and stuff, and I just wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, of course. So that was a rough week for me personally. But I think it actually exposed something really cool, was that people actually read terms and conditions. Amazing. But yeah, the terms of use, I'll admit, I think initially some of the first messaging that came out gave some users the impression that, wait, Adobe was training on my content. We have never trained on user content unless you're a stock contributor, at which point we have. So we never have trained on user content. We never will. There were several blog posts that were since released after that, further clarifying our stance on that. But the terms of use update, I'll agree, I think was the language in there seemed a little bit vague to some. So that's why we decided to go and release more information at the advice of our legal team.
I think one thing to expand on for us is, like I said, I've been in AI for a long, long time and understand data training. And so when I interviewed a Flawless, just sort of understanding how are they building out their own models to make this happen. And so we've taken a very ethical approach that all of our foundational models were built from two things. One was film libraries that had training data licenses. And second, we had to shoot our own data for synchronicity. And so we brought in SAG actors and reading scripts and essentially created all that. Well, what's even fundamentally more important is our end users. We're not training on their data to train our models. We have to train to improve the individual shot they're working on, right? So what we call fine tuning. But we completely separate and bifurcate all of that data. So our clean models are what's the horsepower, but the accuracy and the quality that you need is coming from your individual shots. And so it's refreshing to be able to have this conversation now and talk about it, where everybody kind of understands where we're getting at. I mean, way back in the day, it was interesting. I was telling Carolyn in the green room back there, when I first started working in AI, all the data that we collected, we purposefully collected that anonymously, so we didn't know who was in the data set. And then when GDPR came out, it completely invalidated every data set on the planet, right? Because we didn't know who that was, and we needed the ability to be able to pull out individual images of likenesses and whatnot. And so from our standpoint, again, it goes back to ethics on what are we trying to guard against, and also we produce a product that has to be copyrighted, right? And so being able to pay attention to that, I think the U.S. Copyright Office has done the best job you would expect them to do. They did a lot of listening. They equated all of the rise of AI to the invention of the photograph. And so they've done as best they can to provide guidance. And we all know that general governing bodies are going to move a lot slower than the actual work. So it goes back to patience. But those details really, really matter. And so being able to disclose that and having people read the terms And being very transparent when things are good or when things can be improved. It's again supporting the right companies that are making their best efforts to do the right thing.
Hi. The way I understand most AI-powered applications work is that you send in a query, the query goes to a data center with a gorillion GPUs, they process your query as quickly as they can, and they send it back to the user. But while this isn't much of a concern for things like asking ChatGPT for a recipe for, frozen chicken breasts, this could be an issue when you're talking about sending clips that include, proprietary studio content. So my question is, do your AI products, their generative models, can they run locally? And if not, how are you making sure that the data is transferred securely enough to comply with studio standards?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I could start. So we've been TPN Gold certified from the beginning. All of our products are deployed in the cloud through AWS. I mean, we couldn't do the work we did with the studios without having that level of data security and content security. That's just a non-starter. And so we're having to do a lot of work with the studios on sort of these cloud-based workflows, right, in air-gapped environments. That's not a thing for every edit bay to be online. But AWS has been a wonderful partner in being able to sort of work through those scenarios, so there is no risk, right? At the end of the day, what they've built is quite a bit more secure than a lot of the individual workstations that people are editing on. And some of the horsepower we need is just simply not possible locally. So we're through collaboration with the right partners, we're able to deploy that. But we understand the importance of data security and content security. It's pivotal to us being successful.
So while I would love for generative models to run on my own device so that I wouldn't have to manage credits, the reality is, especially for the quality bar that most people expect, it's just unrealistic. And I'm sure this number is already out of date, so don't write this down in blood. But I mean, just to give you a sense of scope for Firefly, there's over 730 million assets that are part of that training data set. So unless you're willing to open up your own data center, probably not going to be in the cards for us. That said, in terms of our ability to see what your content looks like, users can provide video references if you want to, for instance, take like a motion example from horses running down a beach and use that as a reference for, let's say, a new prompt, or even providing image references. We don't hold on to that information. It does not go back into informing our training data set later. And because our training data set was trained on what we lovingly refer to internally as vegan material, in the sense that we have license to train on all of that, we also stand by that and offer like several levels of indemnification around that as well. What I've found just in general about working with a lot of networks around generative tool use is, indemnification has to be a must to work with any model. So that's always just good hygiene to ask that question: do we have indemnification around this model at all? But I wish we could optimize that model to run on device, but it's just not realistic given the training data set.
So a lot of the tools you guys have highlighted today are great for like helping us with shot footage, which is cool. But and might be alarmist, I don't know, but a concern that I have for the long-term future is like fully AI generated footage putting the whole industry out of business. So I'm curious if that's like in the long-term future something to be concerned about, or is that just crazy?
Not crazy, right? But I think we can be really deliberate here. There's we really position ourselves as an assistive AI tool. What you're talking about is sort of what's possible with all the generative tools that are out there. Generative filmmaking will be a new industry. It already is, right? If you follow creators online, I see that as additive, right? I mean, you really think of what YouTube did at the end of the day and create a whole new world of creators. I don't think it puts this industry at threat or at risk. It's just going to be a different medium, right? Which is fundamentally a different thing. And the audiences will consume that, right? I mean, I think we're starting to get good at when you still see like AI slop, right? It still doesn't look quite right. It's very compelling, but I don't see that moving at a speed that's putting this industry out. It's just, I've been in this industry for too long and around this technology for too long to see at the end of the day, you need humans in the loop. right? You're not going to, write a 2-sentence prompt to generate anything meaningful, right? And also if you look at the people behind those technologies, behind those companies, one reason I feel like we've had such success is we were founded by filmmakers. Most of these technologies are not, right? They're founded by engineers, so they don't speak our language. And so it's going to take them a long time to create what we've built up over the last 100 and something years. But I am excited to see what generative filmmaking is going to be, right? Is again, when content becomes easier to create, we're going to create a whole lot more of it. And then what's going to stand out is quality work, right? And you guys have all been honing your craft. That's why I talk about training and upskilling. There's going to be more work in those areas, right? There's going to be a different distribution channel for that. There's going to be a different level of content consumer for that. And so, I mean, I always have an optimistic look. I drink our Kool-Aid all day long. But I'm not fearful of that. I think it's a really exciting new era. You're already seeing stuff show up on social media that's just, I'll just be honest, it's gold from where it was, a year ago. It's just different way. It's just different level of memes right now.
I think it's just about also just keeping an eye on things because, again, it's like we said, I mean, in 6 months, in a year, it's going to continue to change. So, keeping up and attending things like this is a great way to stay informed.
That said, I will also say, and for anybody that's on TikTok, if you want to go down like a super fun rabbit hole, there are people right now that are creating recreating scenes from like fantasy books and sci-fi books. Like if you want a good finger on the pulse of what the tools are capable of, it's a fun rabbit hole. But I think what we've noticed from a lot of our users that are super users in this space using some of these generative video models to create tools is that the way the editorial process is going, it feels like editing with like found footage. Like, ooh, like I was able to create like this one asset. So like, let me like recreate the story to like work with the assets I was able to create versus what I actually tried to direct via the prompt. And I think the barrier for that is really going to come down to some of the tools like being able to isolate objects and animate them. All of that is going to need to have some sort of user control over that. That's not something that you can magically prompt and an AI is going to interpret based on the vision that is in your brain. There is always going to need to be like very heavy-handed controls that are associated with that. So I would caution, like, yes, the models are going to get better in terms of, frame consistency. They are going to get better in terms of resolution. But I would also encourage you to look at how much can I really control this scene? Yeah, I can provide a video reference, but can I control the limb movement? Can I control the mouth movement? Can I control the voiceover? Like all of those things require such fine-tuned control for it to look good that I think we're a ways away from that.
I can also provide some additional reassurance, which is that there is, we've thought about this a lot, and there is an inherent ontological issue with how these models are made, which is how would you describe an edit to a machine? It is the absence of spatiotemporal continuity such that the two images on left and right create if you follow Soviet montage theory and Kuleshov, a third idea. Okay, tell a computer how to do that. But the footage can't be too jarring. The discontinuity can't be too jarring unless you want it that way. Editors, as far as assembling, telling a computer assemble the footage this way, especially in the scripted space, I'm not concerned.
Hello. I just wanted to know, Asher, because I know that you're kind of the sole representative of the guild. What is Movie Labs 2030, and have they been in touch with you? What are those discussions? Because I've had a anecdotal idea of that through a streaming movie that I'm on right now, and I just wanted to know, and if you could describe it to us, what that is.
All right, in 6 minutes and 51 seconds. Okay, Movie Labs is an initiative that was brought on by the major studios in order to tell companies what they want technologically for the next in the next 10 years by 2030. They want to move as much as they can to the cloud so that they can spin up computers anywhere in the world to capitalize on emerging markets of talent. They want to embrace virtual production as much as possible. They want to have all data connected through a through an ontology, just a way of associating shots to takes to scenes to scripts to writers. It is all encompassing and just trying to get everything as in the cloud and as digitally manipulatable as possible so that you could run certain programs through it to maximize efficiency. Yes, we have been speaking to representatives at Movie Labs. We sent 3 pages of questions to them. We got some responses back. And we can probably provide updates to the guild in soon.
Hi. I was just wondering, is generative AI like the way of the future? And is it something that if we don't all adapt it to it and try every tool that's being made right now, are we going to just completely fall behind? Or is it something that's more for another audience and kind of another type of content consumer?
I think the latter. That is, to my earlier point, I think it's an entirely different medium. I think at some point, maybe there's some usefulness in what it can do. We're just not really there yet. I think probably Morgan can talk a little bit about your adoption, your adaptation with generative extend. There's limited usage at the moment, and I don't see that. You got to imagine the amount of resistance to having that technology come in and replace everyone. Right, the entire industry is fighting that, and also it's not a better experience. You're not creating better content that way. That's why I say I think it's a separate medium. I think it's going to be a separate industry. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that to take your skills into other areas, but I just don't buy into that fear cycle.
At the end of the day, it's a tool. When I graduated film school, my film professors told me like, oh, no one in their right mind is going to adopt digital at all. And if I had listened to them, I would have been out of a job. And I've ended up living my life a little bit on the bleeding edge, which has served me well. Some of the new technology that I was forced to learn throughout my career, isn't necessarily commonplace today, but at the same time, it kind of laid the foundation for whatever came next. So my advice would be, if you've got a problem that you think generative AI can solve, you should test it out. But at the end of the day, it's a tool. And I think it's really great that there's a lot of models that you can access online and create some super silly content with. But at the end of the day, if it's not solving, it should be solving a problem, not, creating a new one, whether that's through finishing because you've got, content that is now not at the same bit depth as your other footage. Think about it practically. Is this actually going to save me time? And is this going to solve a problem for me that I wouldn't like doing the long way? And if the answer is yes, then you should lean into that. But I think it's important to be critical of the tools. Is this a toy or is this a tool?
It's great for temp. And in fact, if you want to learn it for that, it's very useful for that. So we can use generative AI to mock things up, to sell an idea to a producer to buy into that, and then they'll spend the money and get it done for real. Beyond the temp workspace right now, and this is speaking both for generative video and generative audio. The lack of controllability with those tools is not there yet. That you will see it scale up beyond temp, at least right now.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, but before we wrap up, I just want to say you are all brilliant storytellers. And I really hope, we all hope that this answered some of your questions, and certainly let's keep the conversation going. And thank you. Let's thank our speakers for a very informative session.